Many of these protesters were actually in the street blocking, or at the very least confronting, vehicles that were either coming out or into that federal facility. And you see sort of the law enforcement officers strategizing. They do seem to be going back at this point.
Trump is absolutely losing it right now because something he never expected is happening across America. Massive protests have exploded in every major city. And I'm not talking about a few dozen people with signs. I'm talking about tens of thousands of Americans flooding the streets from coast to coast. Over 1,000 planned demonstrations. New York, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Minneapolis, Philadelphia, Boston, El Paso, and dozens of other cities. All chanting Trump must go. All demanding end to ICE crackdowns. All connecting the murder of Renee Nicole Mellon Good to Trump's Venezuela invasion. This isn't scattered opposition anymore. This is nationwide uprising against Trump's presidency, and it's connecting domestic terror by ICE with foreign regime change into one unified message. This president has gone too far, and Americans are done staying silent. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, please subscribe, because you might think you are, but aren't. Your subscription actually matters here. That's why we built John Brown's show, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. All right, let's get into what actually happened, because what we're seeing on the streets right now could change everything heading into 2026. This explosion of protests started with Renee Nicole Good, 37-year-old woman shot and killed by ICE agent in Minneapolis. That shooting became the match that lit a fire that was already ready to burn. Organizers from groups called ICE Out for Good and Indivisible had been planning actions against Trump's mass deportation campaign. But the killing of Renee transformed that planning into immediate action. Share this video with everyone you know, because within days, more than 1,000 protest events were organized nationwide, from small towns in Kansas and New Mexico to biggest cities in America. And protesters aren't just angry about one shooting. They're connecting Trump's domestic immigration crackdown to his aggressive foreign policy. They're seeing pattern, seeing authoritarian overreach, seeing president who thinks he can use force against whoever he wants, without legal constraints, without democratic accountability, without consequences. In New York City, thousands marched along Fifth Avenue and around Central Park, carrying signs denouncing both mass deportation and military capture of Maduro. In Philadelphia, demonstrators explicitly called for Trump and his entire regime to go, named J.D. Vance, named Pam Bondi, named other administration officials as targets of their anger. The chants tell the story: no ICE on our streets, no more coups, no more wars. Venezuela isn't yours. People are seeing connections and they're responding to it. Think about what that means. The scale of these protests is genuinely remarkable. CNN and NPR reporting demonstrations in at least a dozen major cities, thousands marching through snow and rain, braving weather because they feel strongly enough to get out there. But it's not just big cities. Protests popping up in communities across country, places where people might not normally take to streets over political issues. When you see more than 1,000 separate protest events organized in response to single incident, you're witnessing something that goes beyond normal political opposition. This is street-level legitimacy crisis for Trump's presidency, unfolding in real time, on camera, for everyone to see. And it's not just happening in America. Protests have gone global. Demonstrations in Caracas and Bogota condemning Trump's capture of Maduro, his attempt to seize control of Venezuelan oil. Images from these international protests being shared alongside footage from American cities, creating visual narrative of worldwide resistance to Trump's power plays. Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown's show, because when protesters in New York are chanting same slogans as protesters in Colombia, it sends powerful message. Opposition to Trump's agenda crosses borders, represents something larger than domestic partisan politics. This is global rejection of what Trump's doing, and he can't spin his way out of it, can't tweet his way out of it, can't make it disappear by attacking protesters or deploying federal forces. Let me walk you through how this all developed so quickly. The killing of Renee Good was immediate catalyst, but conditions for this explosion had been building for months. Trump's mass deportation campaign has been traumatizing communities across country. Families torn apart, longtime residents swept up in raids, fear spreading through immigrant communities, people afraid to send kids to school, afraid to go to hospital, afraid to cooperate with local police on anything. All that pain and fear was accumulating without clear outlet. And then ICE agent killed woman during enforcement stop. And suddenly there was focal point for all that accumulated anger. The speed with which organizers mobilized 1,000+ protest events tells you something about infrastructure that was already in place. Groups like ICE Out for Good and Indivisible have been building networks, training activists since Trump's first term, learning lessons from Women's March and other mass mobilizations. They learned how to quickly organize decentralized actions, how to make things happen simultaneously in communities large and small. When Minneapolis shooting happened, they activated those networks almost immediately, turned grief and outrage into coordinated street action within days. That's not spontaneous, that's organized, that's movement with structure and strategy. And that makes it much more dangerous to Trump than random angry people showing up places. Now here's where it gets really interesting. What makes these protests different from routine political demonstrations is how they're connecting domestic and foreign policy into single narrative. Normally, immigration activists focus on immigration. Foreign policy critics focus on international affairs. Two movements operate separately, even when opposing same president. But these protests are explicitly linking Trump's ICE raids to his Venezuela operation, treating both as manifestations of same fundamental problem: president who believes he can use force however he wants, against whoever he wants. Without legal constraints or democratic accountability, the chants capture this unified message perfectly. No ICE on our streets addresses domestic crackdown. No more coups, no more wars addresses foreign intervention. Venezuela isn't yours directly challenges Trump's claim to control another country's resources. Trump must go ties it all together as demand for accountability. And when thousands of people are chanting these slogans simultaneously in cities across country, they're articulating comprehensive critique. This goes far beyond any single policy dispute. This is fundamental rejection of Trump's entire approach to governance. And that's what makes this so dangerous for him politically, because you can compromise on single policy, but you can't compromise on fundamental legitimacy. The New York City protest along Fifth Avenue was one of largest and most visible, drawing national and international media coverage, thousands marching through one of most iconic locations in America, carrying signs and banners denouncing both mass deportation and Maduro capture. Visual of that many people in streets of Manhattan sends powerful signal. New York isn't just any city, it's media capital of country and arguably world. When protests there get covered, everyone sees them. Philadelphia demonstrations were notable for how explicitly they called out entire Trump administration by name. Not just president himself, protesters demanded Trump and whole regime must go, specifically naming J.D. Vance, Pam Bondi, other officials. This framing suggests movement sees problem as systemic rather than personal. Not just about one man, about entire governing apparatus that protesters believe is acting illegally and immorally. That broader framing has implications for how opposition develops, for what demands emerge over time. Because if problem is whole administration, then removing Trump alone doesn't solve it. Need comprehensive change, need accountability for everyone involved. That's bigger ask, bigger fight, but also potentially more transformative if movement succeeds. Geographic spread of protests beyond major cities is politically significant. Demonstrates that opposition to Trump isn't confined to liberal coastal areas. When people marching in small towns in Kansas and New Mexico, in communities across heartland that Trump needs to maintain his coalition, that's warning sign. For Republicans who assumed his base would protect him from consequences, these protests happening everywhere, which means political impact could be felt in swing districts and competitive states where elections actually decided. International dimension adds another layer. Demonstrations in Caracas and Bogota against Trump's capture of Maduro show resistance extends beyond American borders. When footage from those protests shared alongside footage from American cities creates narrative of global opposition. This matters for how United States is perceived internationally. For legitimacy of Trump's claims that Venezuela operation represents American interests rather than just his personal agenda, think about what that means. And connection to local police concerns reinforces protest message from unexpected direction. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara has publicly warned that Trump's mass deportation campaign is pushing policing to breaking point, eroding community trust that officers depend on to do jobs safely. When protesters chant against ICE and major city police chief says essentially same thing, that these tactics are counterproductive and dangerous, it creates powerful convergence. Criticism from streets and from within law enforcement itself, that's harder for Trump to dismiss. Can't say it's only radical leftists. Can't say it's only people who don't care about public safety. Some of his critics wear badges. Some are law enforcement professionals saying Trump's approach makes their jobs harder and communities less safe. That undermines Trump's whole law and order narrative. Deployment of federal forces inside American cities under Trump's internal enforcement campaign provides context for understanding why protesters so angry, why they see connections between domestic enforcement and foreign military operations. Trump has been flooding cities with federal agents and National Guard troops, conducting immigration raids and other enforcement actions. Critics argue this designed to provoke confrontation, to justify even harsher crackdowns. Protests can be seen as response to that provocation, people refusing to be intimidated, instead taking to streets to make opposition visible, to show Trump that Americans won't accept federal agents terrorizing communities, won't accept ICE murdering citizens, won't accept military adventures abroad, won't accept any of it, and they're willing to march through snow and rain to make that point. Trump administration officials defending Minneapolis shooting and Venezuela operation have not been convincing. To protesters, to outside observers, to anyone paying attention, claim that ICE agent acted in self-defense is disputed by witnesses, contradicted by video evidence. According to everyone who saw what happened, Renee was turning car away slowly, maybe 2 miles per hour, no threat, and agent shot her 3 times in face. Characterization of Venezuela operation as law enforcement tied to drug charges is undermined by Trump's own statements. He said US will run Venezuela and its oil reserves, said it explicitly. Not will help establish democracy, not will support free elections, will run the country, will control the oil. When official explanations don't match observable reality, they fuel rather than diffuse public anger. And that's exactly what's happening. Now let me talk about what this means politically heading into 2026 midterms. Because political implications of sustained mass protests could be substantial, depending on whether energy persists, how it translates into electoral engagement. Protests alone don't win elections, but they can shift public opinion, energize voter turnout, provide Democrats and Trump critics with visual evidence of opposition. That can be used in campaign advertising, in media coverage, in persuading undecided voters that Trump has gone too far, that his presidency is tearing country apart. That change is needed. Question is whether this moment represents peak of outrage that will fade, or beginning of sustained movement that builds toward November. An answer depends on what happens next. If protests continue, if they grow, if they spread to even more communities, then we're looking at genuine mass movement that could reshape political landscape. Democrats would have wind at their backs, Republicans would face pressure to distance from Trump, competitive races would tilt toward opposition, midterms could become referendum on Trump's authoritarianism, with protesters providing constant visual reminder of what's at stake. But if protests peak now and then decline, impact will be more limited. Might energize base, might generate some good footage for ads, but won't fundamentally change trajectory, won't create sustained pressure on Trump, won't force Republicans to choose between Trump and their own political survival. So maintaining momentum matters. Keeping people engaged matters. Turning street energy into electoral power matters. And here's what I think is really significant about this moment. Protests of this scale don't happen in vacuum. They require deep reservoirs of anger and frustration that accumulated over time. Killing of Renee Good didn't create that anger. It released anger that was already there, waiting for catalyst. The speed with which 1,000+ events were organized tells you networks were in place. People were ready to act. All they needed was moment to mobilize around. That infrastructure doesn't disappear when current protests wind down. That energy doesn't evaporate. It remains available for future mobilization, for next triggering event, for next outrage, for election day turnout. And that's what should terrify Trump, because he can't stop making people angry, can't stop doing things that generate opposition, can't help himself, so he'll keep providing catalysts. And movement will keep responding. Trump's likely response to these protests will probably make things worse for him. His instinct is always to escalate when challenged, to double down rather than moderate, to attack rather than accommodate. That instinct served him well in many political fights where showing strength mattered more than showing wisdom. But mass street protests operate by different rules. Escalation often produces more protesters, not fewer. Dramatic confrontations create more sympathetic images for opposition, not less. Trump may not understand how to navigate situation where his usual tactics make things worse, where attacking protesters energizes them, where deploying federal forces generates more opposition, where doubling down drives more people into streets. But that's likely what will happen. Because Trump can't help himself, can't resist attacking people who oppose him, can't resist escalating conflicts, can't resist showing force. So he'll rage on social media about protesters. He'll deploy more federal agents to cities. He'll have officials defend controversial actions with talking points that don't match reality. And all of it will fuel more protest, more opposition, more anger, vicious cycle that he can't break, because breaking it would require restraint he doesn't have. Connection between what's happening in streets and what's happening in courts matters too. At same time, protesters are marching against Trump. Judges are ruling against him. Republican senators are breaking with him. His own government experiencing mass resignations. All these pressures hitting simultaneously, creating convergence of opposition from multiple directions. No single one of these forces may be enough to fundamentally change Trump's trajectory, but together they represent comprehensive challenge to his presidency that he cannot easily dismiss or overcome. Courts constrain his legal authority. Congress blocks his legislative agenda. Protests delegitimize his moral authority. Resignations weaken his administrative capacity. All of it compounds, all of it reinforces, all of it makes governing harder. And we're watching it happen in real time. Watching presidency implode from multiple directions. Watching Trump lose control of narrative, lose support of institutions, lose legitimacy in streets, lose ability to govern effectively. This isn't normal political opposition that any president faces. This is comprehensive rejection of Trump's entire approach, and it's only getting worse. Bottom line is this: massive protests have erupted across entire country. More than 1,000 planned demonstrations, tens of thousands marching in cities coast to coast. New York, Los Angeles, DC, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, Boston, everywhere, chanting Trump must go, demanding end to ICE crackdowns, connecting Renee Good's murder to Venezuela invasion, seeing pattern of authoritarian overreach, rejecting it, fighting back. Started with killing of Renee, 37-year-old mother shot by ICE agent, but it released anger that had been building for months. Organizers mobilized networks, turned grief into action. Within days, had 1,000+ events organized. Infrastructure was ready. People were ready. Just needed catalyst. And they got it. Protests connecting domestic and foreign policy into unified narrative. Trump uses force against whoever he wants, without constraints, without accountability. ICE raids and Venezuela operation are same problem. Same authoritarian impulse. Same abuse of power. Protesters seeing it clearly, demanding comprehensive change, not just policy tweaks, fundamental rejection of Trump's approach. Geographic spread is remarkable. Not just big cities, small towns, heartland communities, places Trump needs for his coalition. International protests too. Caracas, Bogota, global rejection of Trump's actions. Can't be dismissed as partisan, can't be spun away, too big, too widespread, too unified in message. Police chiefs agreeing with protesters, saying Trump's tactics counterproductive, dangerous, makes their jobs harder, erodes community trust. When law enforcement joining critique, Trump can't claim it's only radicals. His critics wear badges, undermines whole narrative. Political implications for 2026 huge. If protests sustain, if energy translates to votes, Democrats have wind at backs, visual evidence of opposition, footage for ads, stories of victims, testimony of critics, everything needed to argue Trump tearing country apart. Republicans facing pressure, competitive races tilting, midterms becoming referendum. Trump's response will likely make worse. He'll escalate, attack, deploy forces, all of it fueling more protest, more opposition, more anger. Can't help himself, can't show restraint. So cycle continues, protests grow, pressure builds, presidency weakens, all happening simultaneously with court losses, Republican defections, resignations, comprehensive challenge from all directions. This is legitimacy crisis playing out in streets. Americans rejecting Trump's authority, demanding he go, making opposition visible, refusing to be intimidated. And it's just beginning. More protests coming, more mobilization, more pressure, leading toward 2026, leading toward accountability, leading toward change. We're watching it happen. We're covering every development. This story continues. Stay tuned.